every day in their houses. They manage their debt. But then there's another layer to it. And the other layer to it is this, Mr. President. We then decide, once we have managed our liabilities, how much we owe other people, we decide, okay, is hurricane season coming? My roof wants fixing. I want to make sure that I can fix my roof, Mr. President. So I may decide to go back to my existing mortgage company and say I want to reopen my mortgage, take some of the money out of my mortgage, and I want to be able to use that money to fix my roof in hurricane season. Nothing has happened, Mr. President. You have not had any issues with your roof, but you know that in hurricane season, you have some vulnerabilities and you want to have money freed up to do what you need to do. You may have a child at 18, 17, and you're thinking, but boy, my child, when they finish school next year, they want to go to university, and they want to go to Canada, or to the UK, or to someplace further afield where UWI fees that this government reinstituted in 2018 don't apply. So you may have to pull your pocket to send your child to university outside of the university system, depending on what they want to do. And you say, but boy, I want to make sure I got some more money put down to be able to provide for this child come next year so that they can go off to school to university. We do these things as Barbadian households all the time. And what the government is presenting here today is akin to that, with larger numbers, looking at how we manage our liabilities, looking at how we manage our debt, looking at what is maturing when, and programming those funds accordingly. But the government is also freeing up space to pay not for your child at 18 to go to university in Canada, but to make sure that the $72 million that we spend every year to the University of the West Indies, the government is able to account for that. The government is making sure that it has the cash flow within its existing budget to make sure that the large social safety net, which includes the welfare program, the One Family program, the expansion of hospice care, and all of those things, that the government has money to be able to do that. The government is making sure that it has money in place to make sure to cater to the needs of Barbadians so that we can drive on smooth roads. The government is making sure that our ordinary everyday needs are provided for in our fiscal space. We call it creating fiscal space, putting more money in the government's hand to be able to protect the society. But then there's another layer to that, Mr. President. Now, I talked about the homeowner who is concerned about hurricane season. I talked about the homeowner who is thinking, well, hurricane season is coming, and I don't know. They keep talking about all of these hurricanes that are coming, and they're faster, and they're more furious, and there are more of them, and they're more ferocious. I want to make sure I protect my household and my family. This government, Mr. President, wants to protect Barbados against the headwinds that are coming all around us. Now, in 2019, February, the headwind of COVID came our way, and we saw that expenditure outstripped revenue, so the government had to manage that. Then we saw another headwind coming, Mr. President. We didn't have enough warning. We had an ash fall. We had a volcano next door. But then, Mr. President, we didn't see another volcano or another pandemic. But, Mr. President, we accounted for them in our fiscal measures. So this measure that is before us in this fiscal liability management accounts for the possibility that a pandemic could come again, or a natural disaster could come again, and it allows for the government to have the ability to suspend principal payments during those periods. So that's what the government has done. It is the same thing, Mr. President, at a national level of a person attempting to protect their household in advance and before something happens. Then it gets even more detailed, Mr. President, because the headwinds that we were talking about, pandemics, natural disasters, are accounted for in clauses in this liability management bill, resolution, facility. They're included in all of our debt management facilities, Mr. President. But What accounts for the war in Russia and Ukraine that then caused prices of all kinds of products to spiral out of control? What accounts, Mr. President, for the war in the Middle East? As I watched the Middle East over the last couple of days, weeks maybe, but certainly the last couple of days, I remember, Mr. President, one of my best friends in the world, for the last several years, she lived in Kuwait. And I said to her in our girls' chat a few weeks ago, you know, I trust God with my life. I do. And I trust him with yours. Because just a few years before, you were in Kuwait and you thought about the possibility of taking up an offer to work at a school in the UAE in Abu Dhabi. And you were so excited by that thought. And then somehow, some way, a school in Bangladesh was so aggressive about recruiting you. She's Jamaican, she's not Bajan. And between Abu Dhabi and the school in Bangladesh, they pushed and had a bidding war for her. She ended up switching away from going to Abu Dhabi and she went to Bangladesh instead. And I messaged her in our chat this week and I said to her, God always had a plan. He always has a plan. We catch up afterwards. And I said to her, as I look at flights being suspended to Dubai, airspace being closed over Doha, ships being pulled out of Bahrain, and on we go in the Middle East, I am so thankful that you are in Bangladesh and that your heart shifted for reasons that you did not know to take you out of the Middle East. But who could have anticipated that what we saw evolving between Israel and Palestine would morph into a wider Middle Eastern war, affecting then Lebanon, affecting now Iran, and how it pulls the rest of the Middle East region together with it. We saw the news of the various back and forth responses that went among the countries, but how do those things then impact global stability and predictability? And the markets got skittish. Countries got skittish. Development partners had to maintain stability, and countries had to make decisions. What did the Barbados government decide to do, Mr. President? The Barbados government decided to plan in advance and to account in advance for what could come down the pipeline if the same type of disruption that we saw as a result of COVID, that we saw as a result of the ashfall, that we are still experiencing as a result of Ukraine and Russia, if that continues in the Middle East as well. You are mitigating against risk at this point. This is really what we're talking about, mitigating against risk and attempting to put Barbados in a position where we do not fall prey to the challenge of not having fiscal space to respond to the needs of our people, the social needs of our people, the education needs of our people, the health services needs of our people, but the day-to-day living needs of our people, Mr. President. It is the reason why, despite the ridicule coming from some quarters in terms of the foreign reserves that Barbados has held, Barbados has made sure to hold overly healthy reserves. Because while those who play fast and loose and who have the luxury of sitting on the outside and not actually being accountable or responsible to the people for protecting those people, this government has to be responsible because we are also accountable. So the voices that talk about, oh, how much reserves they have and so on, and whether or not free up some of the reserves, they're the ones who caused this government to have to take on one of the facilities that is being prepaid in this liability management operation. When the Eurobond was taken out in 2018, Mr. President, the Eurobond was taken out to account for the debt that we encountered upon taking office in 2018. That Eurobond would have expired and come and matured, and you heard the Honorable Prime Minister speak about it in the other place last night. That had to be accounted for. So this government wasn't just planning for today and playing fast and loose. This government is planning for tomorrow. That's a fact. So this liability management exercise has two components, and I've just referred to one. The payments of $340 million to retire 84% of the government of Barbados' existing 2029 bond. That's a Euro bond. That is the bond that held the restructuring of 2018 coming out in the 10 years of the previous administration, and that is being retired ahead of schedule. The second element of this liability management, Mr. President, to be able to protect our fiscal space, to mitigate against the risks of what may be coming down the pipe, and to ensure the government has fiscal space to spend on Barbadians, is the repayment of approximately $142 million of the principal maturities due to the International Monetary Fund. Is it being paid on schedule? No. It is being paid ahead of schedule. The government is taking a frontal approach. Prime Minister always tells us, take things on the front foot. Don't wait until it comes down the pipe to be able to respond. What was the objective of this bond issuance, Mr. President? The operation is meant to free up approximately $372 million in net terms for the remainder of 2025 through calendar year 2026. So over the next 2 years, it gives Barbados a buffer, a cushion, a risk mitigator of $372 million. This significant reduction in outflows from the country will also help the government and the central bank that is responsible for fiscal management to ensure that we can maximize our reserve levels over the period, to boost our resilience to external shocks, and to support our work so that we can benefit from continued upgrades from the international agencies. Now, historically, the last time that the country did this was in 2006. And you heard the minister in the Ministry of Finance speak about that in the other place when he spoke yesterday. Now, if people in this chamber were to think about going to the banks may have a certain interest rate. If you are a good customer, if you had repaid your debts, if you have demonstrated good fiscal management of your own affairs, they will give you a loan. Most of us then see the credit rating bureaus in our personal affairs. I'm making it deliberately connected to our household affairs. When we go to the when we go to the banks or the credit unions, they tell you that they have, and they put a charge in the facility that you are applying for you to go and get, for them, I should say, you're paying for it, but they're going to go to the credit rating bureau to assess what kind of risk you are. Mr. President, the Oinaka administration, as it was in 2006, would have gone to the market and it would have done the last bond issuance. In 2010, under the last government, there was also a specific loan. Everybody remembers that loan. And we remember it because there was a balloon payment that was coming up immediately after the election of May 2018 that would have seen Barbados' foreign reserves depleted almost in their entirety and putting the Barbados dollar in peril. That loan facility, at a time where there were concerns among the international rating agencies, just like we have a credit bureau, Fitch, we talk about Fitch and Moody's and those kinds of things, but they're no different, Mr. President, than when we go to get a credit rating to get a loan from a bank. If you're a good customer, you typically get a good response and you get a good interest rate. If you're not a good customer, then inevitably you end up finding yourself in places like loan sharks, where your interest rate in the shortest possible time frame is extraordinarily high. That is what happened when in 2010, this loan was undertaken, Mr. President, and the interest rate at the time was over 12%. And it meant, Mr. President, that the fiscal management of the country at the time was so regarded by the credit rating agencies that they had an extraordinarily high interest rate. That's what we got. And it put Barbados in peril and our dollar in peril by 2018, when that payment would have been due in June of 2018, forcing the government to begin this process that has still continued of the debt restructuring, including, Mr. President, the 2029 Eurobond that we're referring to here. So has this government therefore demonstrated, with all of the interest rates in a period of low interest rates and now rising interest rates, and I'm going to come to that for a moment, that they have had solid management, fiscal management of the country's affairs? Absolutely, Mr. President. And we have not just said so. This administration has made sure that the credit rating agencies, in the same way that we have Carrie Chris and others who view us and give a report on us to the bank, that those who look at sovereign debt is what is called, what government debt is called, whether it is Moody's, whether it has been Fitch, whether it has been Standard & Poor, their report on Barbados has in all instances been positive post-2018. And we have seen the reversal of circumstances where in 2010 you got this huge loan, massive interest rate, major bullet payment, put the fiscal position of the country in peril, and also the dollar in peril, the Holy Grail in peril, and now you have switched and gone 180 degrees to do the opposite, where every single rating agency, every single development agency, and now, Mr. President, for the first time since 2006, in a solid demonstration of confidence, Mr. President, confidence. There are those who would wish to pretend that confidence is not there. But I am certain that as I heard the Honorable Minister of Finance speaking in the other place on this matter, he talked about this, Mr. President. He said, you know, and I remember when Cabinet approved the non-deal roadshow, they went on the road. It was the entire finance team led by the Prime Minister and the advisors that have anchored us through 2018 to now with the return of confidence to Barbados. And it was meant to be a no-deal roadshow. At the time, they wanted to kind of, I guess you would call it, test the waters, see what's out there, be able to figure out, so here's what we are proposing in risk mitigation. Let's see what the market tells us. And despite the loud shouts from some quarters that there's no confidence in Barbados, not just the IMF said it, not just the World Bank said it, not just the rating agency said it, but hear what now? The bond market investors said it. And this bill, this resolution before this chamber today, speaks about $500 million that is being proposed. But the Honorable Minister in the other place, he said this, that when they put out the tender after the non-deal roadshow was completed, that the tender, publicly issued, people from all over responded. And you know, sometimes when people, sometimes there are circumstances where people want to come and throw money at you. You know, when you have an artist that is exciting and everybody wants to sign this artist and they're excited by it. And so they come and they say they offer you more and more and more. Over $2 billion, Mr. President, over $2 billion was offered as almost, you can call it almost an expression of interest in response to the tenders. You almost call it that. If that is not an expression of confidence, then somebody is living in a parallel universe where truth is false and where false is truth. But you know, we've been having this environment where there are those that live in their own echo chamber. So they're not interested in what the government has to say, but they would want the public to believe them. But the public doesn't have to depend on either side of the political divide in this country. The public can depend on independent agencies that are not local and have a vested interest, but they are global. So when you cast aspersions on whether or not Barbados has the confidence to attract investment, you are in fact attempting to say that you know better than Moody's. You know better than Fitch. You know better than the World Bank. You know better than the IMF. You know better than all of the institutions globally, whoever they are, and we should listen to you alone and disregard all of these entities that have solid credentials in global fiscal management. So, Mr. President, I've spoken already about the mitigation. I've spoken about the natural disaster and the pandemic clauses, and I've spoken about why it is being done. Let me get into the specifics as I come closer to the end. This particular issuance, Mr. President, will carry an interest rate of 8%. It will have a 5-year grace period on principal, and it will be followed by 10 equal payments of that principal. The final maturity of this facility will be in June of 2035, and the higher interest rate on the new bonds when compared to the existing 6.5 bonds due in 2029 is due to the following. 1A, the maturity, which is 5.5 years longer in weighted average terms, and B, the increase in underlying USD interest rates, which globally have increased by approximately 2.8 percentage points since the 2929 bond was issued in 2019. There are approximately, Mr. President, 90 international, not 19, but 90 international bond investors. What was I talking about a few moments ago, Mr. President? Confidence in Barbados. International bond investors. And afterwards, I guess you would call it a secondary offering, it is going to be listed on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange for public trading. Made available, Mr. President. By prepaying the IMF loan, Mr. President, there are 3 things that we're hoping to be able to do. Eliminate the need to repay principal to the IMF between July 2025 through the end of June 2027. I started out by saying, Mr. President, the government is creating fiscal space to make sure that it can anticipate and have room given the headwinds that we are seeing geopolitically. Secondly, it is meant to reduce the government's borrowing from the same IMF from its current level at 505% of its quota down to just above 300%, providing room, if need be, for new emergency facilities in the event specifically of a natural disaster. It's also meant, and we know this, Mr. President, even if you had a student revolving loan, you know that you pay back the principal, you have a reducing balance on your interest. It's meant to reduce the interest to be paid to the IMF, including on the prepaid maturities, and to eliminate the time-based interest surcharges, thereby cutting the surcharges roughly in half, 50%. So, Mr. President, debt service matters. The ability to be able to service our debt matters to Barbados. It matters to this government. And the ability to service this debt is, one, about our reputation. May Barbados never return to the days where we were seen as a pariah in fiscal spaces. May we never return to those days, Mr. President. I know that the average Barbadian felt that keenly. It is also meant, Mr. President, that Barbados has the ability to spend on social services, to spend on people, to address the issues that concern people on a day-to-day basis. And overall, Mr. President, by focusing on the combination of debt management, i.e. liability management, and simultaneously on the growth agenda, which is the investment in sectors, key sectors, Mr. President, including the new investments in life sciences, the new investments in the agro-processing firm, the establishment for Barbados of a logistics hub, focusing on growth to be able to generate revenue, growing the global business sector, Mr. President, to be able to create that balance between revenue and expenditure and debt management in order to be able to ensure that people can come first. You can't spend more than you earn. If you earn $100 and you're spending $1,000, Mr. President, then you're back into the period of between 2010 and 2018. 2008 and 2018. If you are spending more than you are earning, if you have no growth trajectory, if you have no investment in the productive sectors, as I speak right now, Mr. President, I am here because of the Senate, but I was really meant to be joining the other members of the productive sectors right now on mission to be able to identify alternate suppliers. And why? Risk mitigation. When countries find themselves in geopolitical challenges and different markets are facing difficulties, if, Mr. President, as we are seeing in some of the farm labor programs, you have the persons who are brought from across the region and elsewhere working in those farm labor programs, and they're being deported or they're being restricted from coming. The expectation, Mr. President, is that you may find yourself in a position where output is reduced, and then when output is reduced and you have to service your domestic needs, what happens, Mr. President? Export restrictions. If you're a tradesman or you're watching these things, you're uncomfortable. So what is Barbados looking to do? Again, risk mitigation. So if you're not buying from A, or if you're unable to buy from A, who else should you be buying for? We don't sit and wax philosophical on the outside of these things. We are responsible for fixing them and anticipating what could come. And so a team, as we speak now, is on the ground overseas looking at and meeting, and I'm seeing the messages coming in on my phone, including the commerce team and the small business team, to be able to look at where alternative supplies, in particular for goods that Barbados can source from other jurisdictions in the event that we are unable to source from traditional markets. That is what is happening. As I stand here today, Mr. President, we have an entity that is on retainer to the government, to the ministry, and they have been working with us on our global business outlook, and they have worked instrumental in crafting how we go about the corporation tax reform processes. We are in the process now of finalizing a pivot strategy. I call it that, a pivot strategy. In the event that we can't go here, do we go there? And what is the impact by tariff line, Mr. President, of the primary products that this country imports? Where do we buy them from? What is the impact of the current trade war on those tariffs? How can we source them from alternate suppliers? How do we look then at shipping routes, whether the shipping routes align with these new suppliers? What does Barbados want to put ourselves in a position to do? All of that work is happening as we speak. All that's risk mitigation, Mr. President, all of that. And that's just a snapshot because I don't have the time to go into all. I could be here all day if I needed to do that. So, Mr. President, I want to commend this facility and this bill, this resolution, to this honorable chamber. I want to commend this government's management of this country's fiscal affairs to this honorable chamber. I want to commend this government's need to ensure that we are balancing our fiscal affairs, our debt management, our revenue generation affairs with our social obligations to people and putting people first. I am not going to stand here, Mr. President, and attempt to mammagai Barbadians into thinking that the government has the answers for cost of living and all of the things that are external, because when prices go up externally, we import those prices and we have to mitigate them. But I am going to say confidently that this government has attempted that as long as it comes within our jurisdiction, every available measure that is available to the government, we will put in place and we will take those actions to protect Barbadians. But bracing for shocks, we are. Anticipating shocks, we are. Mitigating against shocks, we are doing that. And that, Mr. President, is what this particular resolution, as part of the overall arsenal of the government, is about to do. And I beg to move that this resolution do now pass, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Senator Walters.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President. The Honourable Senator found it, in my opinion, very difficult to get the support of those on her side during her speech. Everyone seemed distracted, and I did not see one sign of support for what she was saying. But I listened, Mr. President, and like the leader of government business, this is a simple resolution, and we need to keep it simple. The resolution, purpose of the resolution, Mr. President, is to raise 1 billion Barbados dollars on the international market. 1 billion Barbados dollars on the international market, 500,000 US dollars. 500 million US dollars, Mr. President. And the purpose, Mr. President, is to do two things: to refinance the government's 6.5% 2029 bond and to repay a portion of the government's debt to the IMF. So let us call it what it is. The government is borrowing money, or seeks to borrow money, to pay off its existing loans. But this, Mr. President, will have a negative effect on every household in this country. As much as the government seeks to defend this particular resolution, and when we hear about the liability management and managing debt, we're on the side that, yes, we have to manage our debt, we have to manage our liabilities. But in this instance, is this the right thing for the government to do on behalf of the people of the country? Is there any sense today that the government should seek to borrow at 8% to clear debts that are at 6.5% and under 4%? I say it does not, Mr. President. There's no sense in taking a loan or raising money, paying a coupon rate or interest rate in excess of what your existing debt is. And in the case of the two current or existing debts that we have, obligations that the country currently has, one is at 6.5%, which is the 2029 bond, and the other is debt from the International Monetary Fund, which is under 4%, Mr. President. What the government is essentially doing is prematurely and unnecessarily carrying up the cost of interest that taxpayers will have to pay. Taxpayers for the next 4 years will have to pay 1.5% more than they would have if we kept this 6.5% 2029 bond in play, Mr. President. It would have benefited the taxpayers if they would have obtained the new debt at the current rate or at a rate below, Mr. President. The country's debt obligations do not go away. They are just pushed further down the road. And when we hear about the debt management, the liability management, we hear about hurricane season is coming and we might need to fix our roof before it gets blown off. Those are real and practical things, Mr. President. But we have a hurricane season every year. So is the government saying that they will never start to repay their loans? Is the government saying that they will find an excuse every time there is a principal payment to be paid to quote-unquote refinance it or push it down the road? And in this case, it is at an extra cost to the government to the taxpayers of this country. It is a higher interest rate, and it extends our debt obligation. It does not reduce it, Mr. President. Nor does that benefit the country. They say it does. We do not believe so, Mr. President. Because, Mr. President, even in the example that the leader of opposition business spoke about in terms of a mortgage, government business, sorry, You will not go to the bank and refinance your mortgage from 6.5% interest to 8% interest. No one in here will do that, Mr. President. No one in here will do that. So the example is quite fitting to show that this government is making a bad policy decision to advance the payment of this current debt in this way, which will incur at least $60 million over the next 4 years in additional taxpayer expense. That means the possibility of higher taxes. That means, Mr. President, less money for the social services. Mr. President, it is unfortunate that this government continues to kick the can down the road. It makes us question how much of our debt since 2018 has been repaid. Every time there is a repayment of a debt of the government of Barbados, the government finds a creative way to not pay the debt that the country has. And that is your problem. It is a problem because as much as all of the motives of the government, our debt is around the same $15 billion it was in 2018. 7 years on, Mr. President. And it is for this reason that you are seeing that taxpayers are continually burdened with such high debt, because this government is kicking the can down the road. Mr. President, this transaction also raises a pertinent question about the treatment of local investors and workers in this country by this government compared to the treatment that they're willing to offer to foreign investors, Mr. President. And I listened to the debate in the other place, and one of the persons or one of the companies or groups that were on the road show was a company called White Oak, Mr. President. And White Oak has a reputation of spearheading the restructuring in 2018 that contributed to where the National Insurance Scheme is today. Mr. President, losing $1.3 billion in investment revenue, having workers having to work to 67, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I raise on a point of order.
Yeah, what's the point of order?
Mr. President, the honourable member is misleading the House. The work of White Oak on the National Insurance Scheme is not being accurately represented. In fact, the reason the National Insurance Scheme found itself in a position was because the Democratic Labour Party refused to pay the National Insurance Scheme for almost 10 years. And so the Barbados Labour Party had to find itself in a position to repay the National Insurance Scheme, and that is the reason why it had to take a haircut. So if the members of the Democratic Labour Party are unclear of their own history, I am happy to school you today.
Please continue, Senator Walters.
Mr. President, honorable senator is getting very angry, but the facts are that White Oak spearheaded the restructuring of the debt of the government of Barbados in 2018, which resulted in pain for hard-working citizens in this country that contributed to the National Insurance Scheme, and we are still feeling it today.
We all had to take a haircut.
Furthermore, Mr. President, this government comes to this chamber and parades about making the economy better by using our national insurance funds and restructuring it to lower interest rates. They said in 2018 with that restructuring, they did it. 2022 with the debt for nature swap, they did it. In 2024 for the debt for climate swap, they did it. And all those restructurings hit the national insurance scheme for close to $2 billion Barbados dollars, Mr. President. And you know what they did, Mr. President? They said that they are going to refinance the government debt to lower interest, so the workers take a hit. But we are saying today now that the investors, the foreign investors, get the benefit of that because they're not taking a hit. They're getting 8%. They're getting even more than our existing debt. Double in some instances. The IMF debt is less than 4%. Why do we have to repay 24 months before it is due? The bond debt is 6.5%. Why would we go into an arrangement to pay 8% for 4 years? That will cost taxpayers, I said, Mr. President, at least $60 million over that period. Money that could be going to our police force to give them a pay increase to help them to fight crime, Mr. President. That is the point that is being made. Not about the Democratic Labour Party. It is about today, Mr. President. And this is not good policy on behalf of hard-working people in this country. Mr. President, there is the tendency for this government to brag and boast. And they have said over the last 2 days, including today, that we are attracting investment, Mr. President, and that about $2.8 billion in investment was attracted when we put our offer on the table. But, Mr. President, when there is a sale, people come to buy. And that is what is attractive. The fact that investors will get a healthy return on the backs of hardworking Barbadians. There's nothing hard about that. A company selling a product for $10 on the shelf and says she has a sales going to sell it for $6.50. People are going to come and buy it on that day. They're going to want to buy it. They're going to line up to buy it, Mr. President. Cricket is all going. If there's a sale on tickets for tomorrow, Kensington will be burst, Mr. President. So it's nothing that this government is doing spectacular as relates to attracting investment. It is unfair because this is coming at a significant cost to those who have to pay the interest. Mr. President, government has clearly been disadvantaging our workers, and they are clearly enfranchising foreign investors. I showed the correlation to the consecutive restructurings that impacted workers in this country and the national insurance, and I contrasted to this effort here to pay such a premium to write off debt at significantly lower interest rates, years in advance, Mr. President. So 8.5% interest is too high. It was too high in 2018 when the government restructured the debt when they came to office. It was too high in 2022 with the debt for nature swap. It was too high in 2024 for the debt to climate swap. Why isn't it not too high in 2025 for the foreign investors. Mr. President, the second purpose of the loan is to pay down on our debt to the International Monetary Fund. And this country has entered into arrangements with the IMF on 2 previous occasions. And on both of those occasions, Mr. President, under both governments, neither of those governments had to borrow money to pay off those loans. Why does this government have to borrow money to pay existing loans when they claim that the economy is growing rapidly? You heard the claim here today too, Mr. President. All of these months of consecutive growth. You hear the claim that unemployment is at an all-time low, the best ever in the history of the country. So we are told, Mr. President. But yet, we still have to borrow money to pay loans. And we have just heard weeks ago that Barbados will get its last drawdown for the IMF. And in less than a month, we are asked to borrow money to pay the IMF loans. It is ridiculous, Mr. President. When we hear that investor confidence has been renewed in this country, something is not adding up. Mr. President, they say they have foreign direct investment, and we have a construction boom. Mr. President, that is what we are told, that things are good in Barbados. But on the other hand, we have to borrow money to pay existing loans when the principal payments become due. This is where we are, Mr. President. A government that is kicking the can down the road. Mr. President, I heard the leader of government business when she spoke about freeing up space, when she spoke about the ability to respond to crises. And I think it is a reasonable position. But I asked in this chamber on a previous occasion, and I ask again, how much is enough? How much will be adequate? Can the government say how much reserves will be adequate to cushion Barbados? Don't let us limp along without a straight policy of saying that in the past, for example, we held 12 weeks of cover, reserves cover. And if they believe now, as the reserves stand at 7 months, that is a new policy, say so to Barbados, Mr. President. I say why? I get the buy-in, Mr. President, but do not use it at every opportunity to come and throw the possibility of a crisis in our face. We live in a crisis environment, locally with crime, internationally with all the things that are happening. But the government also is saying to us that they also introduced natural disaster clauses, in an effort, in all the loan agreements, in an effort to cushion the country so that the country will have money in a natural disaster, in the event of a natural disaster. And that is commendable. But it does not give the government a pass to continue to restructure debt and not pay the obligations of the country. All it does, Mr. President, is that it kicks the can down the road. It makes the current government look good in some corners, but it does not reduce our debt liability, and it does not reduce our debt expense of interest that taxpayers have to pay. And when it was convenient for the government, Mr. President, to speak about low interest rates and cheap money, it was fine. But now they have to issue a bond. They're saying now things are changed. Things have changed. When they criticized the same Democratic Labour Party that they love to talk about having a loan of 12% or in excess of 12%, but they are now guilty of doing the same thing. Barbadians want to know what they are going to be doing better. They do not expect that this government will come and use what has been done in the past to give it access to continue in that same way. Have the government improved in dealing with debt management, Mr. President? The the amount of debt is the same, Mr. President, and the interest that taxpayers are asked to pay are back at the same levels as they were in 2018. So a lot of the things that the government is saying is not adding up. And one of those things is that one, the debt is reduced, and two, that they are managing the economy better because they're getting cheaper finance. The Central Bank of Barbados report suggests that that is not true, Mr. President. Debt is in the same region, Mr. President, and the interest payments on an annual basis are back to the same numbers that they were in 2018. Now, if the government calls that liability management, well, they just admitted that they will go to the bank and get a mortgage at a higher interest rate than they currently have. So Lord knows what else they would do. But it's not fair to commit taxpayers in this country to this commitment that is before us today. All facts show, Mr. President, that it will directly affect in a negative way the economy as it relates to the debt profile of the country, because it doesn't change. The interest that will now have to be paid, the increase in interest that will now have to be paid, and that could possibly result, Mr. President, in one, a scarcity of resources that are already limited to carry out social services in this country, or increased taxation to hard-working people who are already crying out for the increase in cost of living. Mr. President, there will always be a hurricane season. Mr. President, we will always have some crises to deal with as a government or as a country, and governments are expected to maneuver through those crises, Mr. President. I agree that there should be contingencies and we should be proactive, but to the extent that this government is practicing these bad policies, it is not going to resound to the benefit of those who have to repay. You are trying to convince yourselves that taking a loan 4 years in advance of a higher interest rate that will cost the country $60 million is better for Barbados. You are trying to convince yourselves to take a loan today at 8%, to pay a loan of 3.85%, under 4%, an IMF loan, 2 years in advance, is better. It is not better. And you know it, senators on the other side. It is not better. The government says it's growing, it has grown the economy. The government says it is getting foreign direct investment. The government says unemployment is down. The government said there's a construction boom. The government said they're bringing new economies on stream, which we have not seen. They have given us indicators, if they are true and honest, why this resolution should not pass in this House today. the Democratic Labour Party does not support this resolution, Mr. President. We will not support it because the leader of government business said that this will free up $482 million of space. Oh, the economy is growing, and the other places said they have a surplus. We have 7 months of reserves, but yet we are unable to pay our debt. And furthermore, we are now putting ourselves in a worse position by incurring additional costs. This is something the government is choosing to do this. Nobody is forcing them to do it, Mr. President. This is a voluntary action that will cost the taxpayers. We will not support this resolution today, Mr. President. What we will call on, Mr. President, is a debt freeze. We are calling for this government to stop borrowing money. You have been telling the country, that you have 7 months for reserves. And I'm going to repeat. You are growing the economy. That's what you say. Unemployment is under 7%. That's what you say. Foreign direct investment is coming in. That's what you're saying. You have a surplus. That's what you're saying. But yet we are asked now to borrow $1 billion, Mr. President. $1 billion Barbados dollars at 8%. This debt that we are asking Barbados to refinance, the first issue of this bond, this 2029 6.5% bond, Mr. President, was issued on 11th of December 2019 by this government. This is not debt from pre-2018. This is debt taken by this government. The IMF program came in under this administration. They cannot even pay their bills. They cannot even pay the debt that they took out on behalf of the country. What is this saying, Mr. President? What is this saying, Mr. President? That something is not adding up. And the Barbados Labour Party needs to get its story straight. Either you're growing, unemployment is low, investment is high, or either you're broke and you have to borrow money to pay your loans. Be honest. Choose one. Can't be both. Cannot be both, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am concerned, deeply concerned, that this government is not or does not know how to manage the debt of this country. All they do is find fancy ways to push the liability further down the road. And where they have autonomy locally, they're unfair, the hard workers, they use the National Insurance Fund. The facts are there. And we as workers lose out. And we as workers have to work longer. We as workers have to pay more national insurance contributions every year. Mr. President, this is not a good sign for this government. And I now see why the leader of government business did not get the response of support from the members on her side. Because when you think about it rationally, it makes no sense. None of them will walk into a commercial bank to refinance any debt that they have by getting higher debt, which will cause them to pay more when the month comes. Mr. President, we call for a debt freeze. The government needs to get on the work. They have collected the most revenue of any government, significant revenues, over 35% increase in annual revenues year on year compared to the last administration. What are they doing with the money? Paying White Oak, paying a consultant $120,000 a month, wasting the money on hope, Mr. President, wasting the money bringing in steel frame homes.
Can I get them erected yet?
Mr. President, not a school repaired in this country since 2017 in a major way. Not a school in a major way has been rebuilt, redone, fix a bathroom here, a block here, 2 classrooms here and there, change the face of the entrance of the emergency department at the QEH. Where's the money going, Mr. President? It's clearly not repaying the loans. It clearly is not repaying the debt that this government got into. Mr. President, we do not support this resolution to borrow 8% on the international market to repay loans existing loans that carry interest rates of 6.5% and under 4%, as is the case with the IMF. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. These discussions about borrowing and loans and bonds excites people in many ways, and the last speaker clearly made one of what I consider his better political speeches that I've heard for a long time. But sir, it is right that we connect what the bill and the resolution, before the chamber is doing with the current economic landscape in Barbados. And I wholeheartedly rise to support this resolution and the contribution made by the Honorable Leader of the Senate in her presentation and explaining the bill. $1 billion, Mr. President, is a lot of money. But we are in an economy that is several billions of dollars in value. And while that figure, it even confused the Honorable Senator because he couldn't translate 500 million into Barbados dollars on the first go. It will confuse ordinary people. But when we really look at the size of the Barbadian economy, Mr. President, and what is happening in the Barbadian economy, we can then start to take out a lot of the hot air out of the discussion. And I'm sure that the calling programs will be rife with discussions that there's another $1 billion added to the debt of Barbados. Mr. President, let me make it very clear. I know no one is denying it, sir. Mr. President, no one is denying that it's $1 billion. But the government is interested in the management of its liabilities. The government is interested in making sure that there is a resilience. If you all don't start interfering with me, I will interfere with y'all. Thank you. The government is interested and invested, sir, in making sure that there is a resilience built out into the macroeconomic landscape of Barbados. Very last thing. And that is important because we cannot predict what catastrophe might befall us. And yes, the government is right to Mr. President, you know that if the government was ever interested in taxing people for the use of their intelligence, you're going to get tax rebate. Because it cannot hear.
Please press on to this.
Mr. President, you will have to trouble me. Because when you try to bring context to it, it will humbug him. So, it's not humbugging me. Mr. President, the country has, I understand that. They can't help. They can't help. The country has seen the benefits of the government putting resiliency into its economic programming. And this is an important move, especially in a small island state that is vulnerable to hurricanes and other shocks. What a disaster clause has done, and this is something that originated in Barbados, it is of purely Barbadian origin, it is new to the international financing landscape, and this is something that we have championed. But what does it do in reality? We went through, Mr. President, the effects of a global pandemic. And because of the restructuring which the opposition criticizes, is the very basis upon which the government has been able to keep Barbados steady during the years of the pandemic when planes were not coming, while at the same time maintaining the debt payment obligations left by the last administration. And I want to say this to the country, Mr. President, the notion that a loan or a debt is a bad thing in a country is absolute nonsense, Mr. President. And the question is, what is the nature and quality of the loan? If this was a situation where the government was borrowing money to pay wages, as it was done under the last administration, I would understand the difference. If this was a situation where the government was going to the central bank and asking the central bank to put money into supply, called printing money, as was done under the last administration, I would understand that. If this was a situation where the government was going to the National Insurance Fund and taking the funds that were available for investment and spending it to pay wages and salaries, I would understand that. If this was a situation where the government of Barbados was not paying the national insurance contributions owed by taking out of workers' salaries in the statutory corporations up to $1 billion in debt and refused to pay into the National Insurance Fund, I would understand that. But they have a soapbox, because everything that their citizens only told them in here and one in the other place, that they speak, the press will carry it. And people in their innocency will listen to what they say and try to understand some modicum of truth. But the debate on the national insurance we have to tell the truth. When we restructured the debt in national insurance, it was not a debt that was created by this administration. It was $1 billion that the government of Barbados refused to pay into the NIS. And like every other, the DLP administration refused. So that if the NIS is owed $1 billion in debt by the government of Barbados, it will mean that this Barbados Labour Party administration will have now to go and tax the people to the extent to finance $1 billion in expenditure that they had in 10 years. And that is what we had to restructure the debt to deal with, Mr. President. Let it be known that this administration did not unfair workers in Barbados. Far be it from the truth. In fact, Mr. President, again, we hear these glib responses about the national insurance and people working longer. The actuarial reports came in on the National Insurance Fund as they are statutorily required to be presented every 3 years. And in 10 years, Mr. President, the demographic profile of Barbados has not been changing. It has been consistent. In fact, we now have a situation where deaths outstrip births. The reason why we took the hard decision in relation to increasing the age at which benefits will accrue to Barbadians on retirement was because that was the sound actuarial advice that we had. We had 3 options, Mr. President. And I have not heard anybody or any expert anywhere say there was a fourth option or fifth or any other options. We could have increased the rates of national insurance. We could have decreased the benefits, or we could have increased the age at which those benefits would accrue to the person when they retire. And when we looked at the demographics, people are living longer. So it meant that even if you retired earlier, it would mean that you would not have to pay those benefits to people over a longer period of time in a fund that is paid in which the working population, the pool of working people available to make contributions to pay those benefits over a longer period of time, Mr. President, is getting smaller. That is a decision made by this government on behalf of not only the people working now, but the people who are retired. School teachers who taught you and I, sir, who are still alive, that retired 20 and 30 years ago, in the circumstances where the life expectancy in Barbados has remained high. These are the realities, Mr. President. So when the government has to deal with liability management and looking at the broader picture, yes, it is true that the loan is at a higher interest rate. But what it does, Mr. President, it allows us to pay off $340 million to repay or retire 84% of our existing 6.5% 2029 bond ahead of schedule. Now the government can say, no, we will pay this at the current rate when the coupon matures in 2029. We can also say that we can take the money that's due to the IMF and pay it when it is due. But the government has to manage the economy. The government has to manage the expectations of people living on this island. The government has to take decisions that ensures that there is resiliency and a capacity to respond to external shocks, whether they be natural disasters, wars, pandemics, or changes in the price of oil. All of these are things that the government has to do. And what the government is saying that we want to be able to create a fiscal space at the same time. So what has the government done? They extend the loan profile of the government, basically. This is a new loan, but it is maturing at a much later date. And it is creating fiscal space in excess of $372 million. To do the things that the last administration could not do, Mr. President. To do the things that we have not been able to do because we had to do $1 billion restructuring to take away all of the stench that they left behind. And then another $1 billion restructuring because of the COVID pandemic. None of the two things, these two occurrences, Mr. President, $2 billion adjustments, restructuring to the Barbadian economy in the last 7 years that the government had to deal with, Mr. President. And when we talk about what the government had to deal with, Mr. President, I don't listen to the protestations of the opposition spokesman on finance and economics. I've known him a long time. He was the treasurer of a club that we were both in, and I understood that then, Mr. President, to be the extent of his capacity to deal with finance matters. I listen, Mr. President, to people like Professor Justin Robinson, who taught me management and economics at the University of the West Indies. Mr. President, and Professor Justin Robinson, who was the chairman of the National Insurance Fund under the Democratic Labour Party administration, and a director of the Central Bank of Barbados, is speaking on the performance of economies in the Caribbean, and not only in Barbados, not only of Barbados, Mr. President. And it is instructive that we bring context to where we are going. He says that the Barbados is in the third year, Barbados in year 3 of its second IMF-supported work program, has brought its deficit down to 0.4% of GDP, with a solid primary surplus of 3.3% projected for 2025. The debt burden remains high. That's what he says. Nobody's denying that. 115% of GDP, but it is on a declining path due to debt restructuring, concessional loans, and steady fiscal consolidation. No, it was 176% to GDP. And if you listen to the accurate figures, I trust that Senator Walters was referring to, he's calling numbers about debt, but at the same time, what he's not telling you is that the economy has grown and continues to grow and is projected to continue to grow. So when the debt to GDP ratio is 176% and the economy is not growing, has not grown, and has failed to grow for 10 years, you understand the contrast, Mr. President. It is as if we have to take a bitter medicine to get out of the situation that you're in, but at the same time, the body now has a better capacity to absorb and to deal with it. That is the difference, Mr. President. And Barbadians know this because they know that nobody is going to put the economy back in their hands anytime soon. And the people of Barbados know that. And that is why they sent the strong message that they sent to them a couple of weeks ago. Nobody's giving them an opportunity to wreak havoc in the country again. But I want to go back, Mr. President. I want to go back to what it is that this bond payment is doing. This bond issuance, sorry, is doing. Now, we have a decision to make. Yes, we can pay the existing maturities as they become due at a smaller interest rate. But at the same time, Mr. President, if we break it down to household operations, you had a loan, it was killing you. In fact, let me put it this way. You marry, it is almost as if you marry a woman who put up her husband because he was beating she, treated she real bad, ain't paying the bills around the house, ain't working, and you are the new man. And you working, and you coming in, and you first thing you say, well, we gotta make some cuts and some changes around here, but at the same time, we gotta do some more hard work. We gotta plant some gardens, keep 2 chickens and some pigs in the back and stuff like that, and then old folk cubs and stuff, we can get them put back in order and stuff like that. We can fix the car and stuff like that. And as things go along, things get better. At the same time, there's a mortgage on that house. But the house needs repairs because it's hurricane season. And you don't know what's happening. No insurance was paid on that house for many, many years. So you're at the mercy of the elements. The car ain't working, and you gotta walk 1.5 miles to get to the nearest place where the buses run. And decisions have to be made. So you restructure the loan. You borrow some extra money because you have equity. You couldn't get that equity because the man that was there before was not working, Mr. President. According to this, wasn't that good. But now they got a new sheriff in town. He could go into the credit union or he could go into the bank and say, here is my partner. He is willing now to become an equity. They got the court them put out the no good man that they had. So he ain't got no share in the house no more. He gone. So you have a new sheriff in town. And you present yourself to the bank. And you want to make things right. But your salaries can't do it. Because gone are the days that you can the carpenter come and ping, 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 ping every 2 weeks and hope that carry you through. But you really need, because the house leaking, the roof won't fixing. They got termite invested in the rafters. Invested in the rafters. You go to the bank says, look, we can give you a new facility, but because your improved credit profile and your capacity now to absorb this loan, we can offer you at a different rate. You got a longer period to repay. That is what the government has done. And what this operation will do is free, as I said, Mr. President, $372 million in the next 2 fiscal years. This significantly reduces the outflow of debt payments by the government. and I heard Senator Walters, I haven't crunched the numbers, saying that this will cost us an extra $60 million. Compare an extra $60 million in cost, Mr. President, to the fact that in the next 2 fiscal years, we will have a $372 million of debt payment, US dollars, Mr. President, that we will no longer have to pay, as opposed to the additional cost of the loan when it is amortized over the life of the loan. That is what the government is doing. The government has made a strong decision in relation to managing its liabilities. It is not just as simple as saying that the loan that we are getting now has a higher interest rate. It is what it is also going to do, because we have not been able to go to the bond market since 2006. And you know why, Mr. President? Because we have a political party in Barbados that believes that we are not an economy, we're a society. But a society can only be able to afford the things that it needs if the economy is working. So for 10 years, they concentrated on the society so much that the economy was not the focus of their operations, and that is why we had to mop up. But the bond issuance is the first since 2006. 2006, Mr. President. For 9 years, we have not been able to get any recognition in the international bond market. We were downgraded, as we know, 20 times in the 9-year period. This little country. And I remember when the former Minister of Finance and the Governor Central Bank said they went on a road show, came back empty-handed, again dipping their hands into the central bank, dipping their hands into the, and it's not to build the schools that they're complaining about, not to do the repairs that Senator Walkers is saying, no major repairs, but to pay salaries. And in order to do that in 2014, Mr. President, they sent 3,000 temporary workers in the public service. They forget these things. And their fiscal consolidation came at the expense of 3,000 public workers. And the only thing that saved the rest of the working people of Barbados was that the then leader of the opposition, who is now Prime Minister, refused to join with them in a constitutional motion to reverse the constitutional amendment which stopped a government from cutting public workers' salaries in Barbados, which was done by the Winafa administration in about 1995-96. And they wanted the opposition to join with them to amend the Constitution to allow them to cut public workers' salaries again. That was the fiscal consolidation that they had in mind, Mr. President. This nonsense that this is going to get into the homes of Barbadians and we can feel it, that is all political bluster and rhetoric, Mr. President. No economic forecaster is looking at this. When you look at the fact that these bonds were put out, right? And there has been such a brilliant response to the issuance of these bonds. It tells you what the international community feels about the confidence of the Barbadian economy and where it is going, right? It tells you, Mr. President, right? It tells you. And I hear they talk about easy money. When the Prime Minister, as leader of the opposition, was telling you all about easy money in the IMF, it was eschewed by the Democratic Labour Party. The government gets criticized for going to the IMF. The government gets criticized for borrowing from the IMF. When the IMF program is ending, we get criticized for leaving it. So you get criticized for going in, you get criticized for going out. That is the mantra, and it sounds good. And the Democratic Labour Party supporters say, my father was one, you feel good, like we government, and then come after. And if they keep noise the whole IMF for poor people and the ordinary people all the time, that is get them riled up. But at the end of the day, what are you really doing to the country? What is that? And the government is not paying its debt. We restructure the debt. But you got to restructure the debt if you are able to handle the payments over a longer period of time, rather than all of the money in a shorter period of time. Who doesn't restructure debt? is restructuring of debt in an economy like Barbados a complicated issue, Mr. President, when ordinary people go to the bank and the credit union every day and borrow more money? When ordinary people go and take out things on hire purchase, extending their debt liabilities, because they know they can't spend all the salary in a new fridge or a new TV. If they were to do that, then what is going to happen with the existing commitments you have next month and the month after that? So you borrow because you have the capacity to repay over a longer period of time. How is this question about debt being so political when you had a rapacious, profligate administration printing money, licking out the NS resources as if it was theirs, Mr. President, not to invest in Barbados' capacity? And people in Barbados could see it. Maybe build more roads. Maybe put more buses on the road. And we create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, Mr. President. The government has to do that with the resources that is available to it. But at the same time, we have to build up other sectors. And you heard the leader of the government business talking about the agri-sector and the energy sector and all the other initiatives that are being done in the name of the people of Barbados, Mr. President. Be upskilling the people of Barbados, Mr. President. There's a gateway of opportunity being created. The construction sector is booming. And yet, we don't have all of the skills to fill it, and then there's more construction to go. What does that tell you? This dystopian nature of view of the Barbadian economy that is being predicated by the opposition is political bluster, Mr. President. It sounds good. I even said to my two colleagues next to me, that if I were over there, this is the angle I would have taken it. And I shared it in our chat. But at the end of the day, what does it mean? You're scoring political points, but at the end of the day, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan? Because when you had the debt to deal with, the only people that you could have turned to is the very, very Barbadians. The stabilization levy, the increased taxes, taking away all the benefits for tax deductions that Barbadians get, not paying the reverse tax credit, not paying Barbados their tax returns because the government was hand to mouth.
The education that you pay for the CIE.
The government was hand to mouth. The reason why teachers went on strike a couple of weeks ago is because the Democratic Labour Party took away the terms leave. You know why? Because it meant that teachers could not get that terms leave off, because when the teacher goes on leave, you got to pay the salary.
Salaries too.
They got to pay the salary of the teacher that is on leave and the teacher that is temporary. All of these are things were done, and in fact, what they did too was so pernicious, Mr. President, that when the teachers had a meeting to discuss it, they knocked the salaries of the very teachers that attended union meetings. Teachers that were on sick leave, that were not reported on a register as being at school, got the salaries not even though they didn't attend the meeting. That was how wicked and pernicious the Democratic Labour Party was. And the Minister of Education talked about cracking heads. When the unions there said, well, this is what is going on, and then we hear all this foolishness being pervaded, that we don't have a democracy in Barbados anymore. All of these things happen under them. All of these things. But when you do not manage the economy, when you do not have the ability to forecast, when you do not have the ability to do, as I said, that the Gideons would have done in the days of the Bible, to keep watch. We live in a dangerous times, Mr. President. Managing our liabilities by extending the debt profile of the country, even at a higher interest rate, when it is going to create the fiscal space to allow you to do several things within the next 2 or 3 years to deal with the neglected sectors. Neglect through the woeful inadequacy of the Democratic Labour Party and the present government's inability to deal with them up front, because we had to deal with the cleanup after we took office in 2018 and then the pandemic. We're now in a position trying to create more fiscal space for the government to do the things that are necessary, sir. That is what we are trying to do. So I just want at the end of the day, what is the end game? Because there's some that the government refused to pay the debt. Like, we're not refusing to pay the debt, we're restructuring it. Because the government and the country and the people of Barbados will continue forever. When I say the government, I don't necessarily mean the Barbados Party administration, because we will get voted at some stage, but not in the distant future. In the future. The point I'm making, Mr. President, is that we are not closing down tomorrow. This is not Kirpalanis. So we are not in a rush to pay the debt when we can extend it and give us the fiscal space to do the things that we have to do. And yes, we would triumph the fact that resiliency clauses and disaster clauses and pandemic clauses are no part of the financial architecture. We claim home to that. It came from here. And the international community has stood and said, yes, these are important things. Because if there is a hurricane, God forbid, knock on wood, Mr. President, you still got to pay a debt. And then the government will be forced to decide between paying the debt and letting people starve or not being able to respond to the circumstances in time of need. And you're at the mercy of an international community, which, as you can see, is growing more nativist and more inward and not extending the aid that it would have normally extended to people looking like us over the many, many, many decades that we have become a little independent country. That is the reality. So the government is not taking a reckless decision by restructuring its liabilities. The government is taking a mature decision, a decision based on all of the stakes in the ground, in the various theaters of economic, social, and cultural activity, and at the same time, making sure that we look after the interests of our people. So I want to scotch the view that we don't support this resolution. We wholeheartedly do. And we will vote for this resolution as we vote and support all the measures of the government that look after the interests of our people. Mr. President, to you, I am much obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and good afternoon to my colleagues. Sir, I think we have had during the course of the day a robust discourse with regard to what was labeled as a short resolution. But while short in terms of its length, I think the ideas which have come forth in the debate shows that the impact coming out of the resolution is anything but short. The government has explained the why. It is stated that it's being done, and I hope I capture the arguments as they were so well laid out. It is explained that it's being done so as to free up fiscal space of $317 million, stated to allow for the government to do its business and to protect the society, protect against shocks, mitigate against the vagaries of climate risk by leaning into the clauses which we now call the Bridgetown Initiative Protection Clauses. The government has also, I would say quite rightly, in terms of the economic performance, lauded the fact that the fund or the bonds were oversubscribed. AAA at 8% is an attractive investment offer, and as pointed out by the opposition, you're being very attractive for persons beyond our shores. But Mr. President, you would know that when you have a AAA rated bond, it means you have to pitch up a bit more in terms of the interest rate. However, it was oversubscribed, and the government is entitled to take the position of, look here, this represents confidence in the Barbadian economy. The opposition, however, as they ought to do as an opposition, questions the timing or the purpose. Why now? Why are you taking away cheaper debt and replacing it with what they've labeled more expensive debt to obtain that 370 million fiscal space. To what end? The opposition has asserted that it is poor fiscal management and it's an increase of $1 billion local currency. I'm not sure whether it's an increase of $1 billion, Mr. President, and the independent senator who would have dealt with this so much more aptly than I can try is not here. But whatever, I believe that the point which is being sought to be made is that you are taking on debt at a higher interest rate. Now, sir, my calculations, which are certainly subject to scrutiny, and we're done with some assistance, shows that for the additional $370 million in fiscal space that this process is obtaining, it is costing us $7.5 million per year. Now, I believe the opposition senator who spoke indicated that it was $60 million. My calculations are 7.5 per year. I don't know how much that adds up to for the length of the instrument. So I believe in the response, when we wrap up the debate, the leader of government business will reinforce, not only for the persons in here, but for the public, why this is being done now. I also believe, sir, that a question which needs to be asked is what is the net inflow of foreign reserves which is occurring after the repayment of the IMF loan? I believe that also is a benefit which we would need to have some discussion on. But in attempting to bring, as always, Mr. President, some balance to the force, I think there are these following questions which the public would benefit from further discussion and or information. Again, the disparity between the external debt offer at 8% compared to the local debt offer at 4.5% for the BOSS bonds that are offered on the market. We understand different markets attract different rates and different types of investors. But if we're giving overseas 8%, can we give locally some more for those local investors who themselves have had to suffer certain impacts in 2018? Secondly, sir, what has been the response to the reverse auctions for the tenders of Series B and Series D bonds, which of course were given to the persons who were impacted, so they get the bonds at a lesser rate, I believe, for their monies which were impacted. I'm subject to tremendous correction, and then are now offered by way of a reverse auction that they will receive money for those bonds with a lesser value than the bonds themselves. I believe these are questions which the public will ask in the context of the fiscal space that the government is seeking to create. And can something be done for these persons who have been impacted, sir? Sir, I think it is a righteous boast for the government to now say we have 7 months of foreign reserves. I also think it's a prudent question for the opposition spokesperson senator to indicate, well, what is our new standard? There was a time when it was 3 months. We all know about it 3 months, whether it's 12 months or 16 months, and then we, of course, holler for murder when it was 2 or 3 or whatever it was. So if we now have 7 months, what is the new standard that we are seeking, or what is our new comfort zone? And why that is important, Mr. President, is that we have seen the impact of foreign currency reserves on economic confidence, in persons willing to invest, and of course, if someone puts money in, they want to be able to get money out. However, I speak as someone who has used the central bank's online FX platform, and I can say I'm very impressed. I utilized it to do some investments, and I thought I was very fussy with the whole process. Kudos have to be given. However, I still understand by persons who are involved in the real estate and legal community that the issue of foreign exchange, money coming in, and money coming out when you're dealing with substantial sums remains an issue in terms of time. So the question is, if we have 7 months, is there any linkages or benefits that should also be extending to the persons who are involved in that market so that they can have a more streamlined, quicker process, just like how we could use the online portal for smaller transactions with regard to major transactions for real estate and other forms of investments. Now, I was, as always, enjoying my brother, Senator Nichols' presentation and his attempt to do his job as a government senator in reflecting on the contributions made by the opposition in here today. And what struck a proverbial nerve was Senator Nichols' reference to the previous government's focus on this society. And what is interesting is the opposition's current attack on this government's focus, they say, on the economy. So perhaps between the two, we could find some middle ground that will capture both sides of the spectrum. And why is this important? Because it is extremely relevant, and one would not want to be said that we are having a conversation about a bond and what is Senator Boyce doing in this discourse. Sir, the fact is, as intense and somewhat jovial the debate has been today, I think we need to have some sober reflection as to how this relates to the crime that we are facing in this country. And I will draw the parallel, sir. Sir, it is a fact that an increase in homicide rates impacts economic growth. That is a fact. It is 0.14 percentage points, and I am referring to, Senator Thompson, the 2023 IMF Regional Economic Outlook Report. And I read, sir, crime and insecurity have become increasingly widespread in LAC, Latin America, and the Caribbean, entailing not only social costs, but significant negative effects on productivity, capital accumulation, and economic growth. Preliminary analysis suggests that strengthening domestic security in the region could meaningfully bolster growth. So let me cut to the point. We have a situation where the police force in Barbados is talking about terrorism, domestic terrorism. We are seeing reports of fellas on bicycles with automatic weapons shooting up the place. We are in here having a debate about a bond and economic policy. This is how it correlates. If the crime is not brought under control, it has an impact on the same economy that we are trying to bolster. We need a combination of perspectives, whether you're dealing with society, whether you're dealing with economy, whether you're dealing with prosperity, or whether you're dealing with morality. We have to come together and deal with this crime issue, or all this pretty talk about GDP and results will be for naught. Why it's relevant to the discourse that we're having, sir, is it is hoped that the $370 million in fiscal space that the government is going to gain is put towards this war on crime, and we stamp it out. That's my contribution, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. If there are no speakers, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make my contribution in this resolution when it comes to matters of such importance that deals with the debt of the country and our future livelihoods. I think it is important that every parliamentarian has a say in terms, because that is the reason why the resolutions are here. And I want to commend my colleague, Senator Walters, for rightly giving a good outlay for all Barbadians, the position of the opposition. Because This resolution, I am certain, has taken many Barbadians by surprise. And the details in this resolution before this chamber today, these details need to go to Barbadians to let them know what our government is doing. Barbadians are concerned about the debt situation within this country. That is one of the constant cries that you hear. The Barbados Labour Party government, yes, they went to the IMF, and we do know that when you go to the IMF, they often, the country feels it, the citizens feel it, and many Barbadians felt it in terms of those who were sent home. Those who now, instead of having permanent jobs, are jobs now on contracts. I'm talking about people who are employees at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, and the plan for employees at Transport Board, the employees at the Sports Council. All of those persons have been collateral damage for the IMF program. And to think that for all of this, this government went into a program to reduce the debt, but yet still coming out of the program, the debt levels and the debt situation is still high. And we also are hearing now that it is necessary to go into this program to pay off the debt which you incurred, when Barbadians will know from history that this country had 2 previous IMF programs, and those IMF programs, when they were exited, because of the cost cutting, which allowed the government to save, or the increases in taxes, which allowed the government to earn revenue, they were able to pay off the loans without having to go to borrow additional funds to pay them off. So what is the situation now with this particular IMF program and the position of the government in this situation? And I heard Senator Nichols, it was difficult to basically keep track of what he was saying because he was from pillar to post all over like a ping pong ball. But when you could make sense of what he was saying and the points that he was making, Barbadians have heard several times this government say it is important to borrow these monies for a rainy day. It is important to borrow these funds for resiliency. But yet we've heard this government borrowed billions of dollars at this stage for the resiliency, and the information is here within the estimates. You just need to go back to the estimates documents. You go from the Caribbean Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, may have been some on the CAF, but not necessarily so, and the World Bank as well. All of these loans, and it would not penalize them for the COVID loans, the loans borrowed during COVID, because that was unexpected, and you had to respond to that situation. But there are so many different loans, and if you would permit me, Mr. President, I would go through this. So the point that I'm saying, we have heard this all before, but we are not seeing it translated into any economic growth in this country and into the stimulation of our productive sectors. We are not seeing it in terms of increasing and improving the revenue, the foreign exchange earning potential of this country in particular, because it cannot be the agenda of this government and the policy of this government that you intend to pay back all foreign loans by borrowing additional loans to pay them back. What about earning foreign exchange to pay back some of these loans? What about increasing the foreign exchange earning potential of this country? You're not seeing it in agriculture, which is struggling. You are not seeing it in the manufacturing sector, because I don't even hear this government speak or bring any policies with regard to manufacturing. I hardly hear them speak about the international business sector. So you do not, and the tourism sector is the one horse that they're horse that they're flogging, and you're getting diminishing returns from the tourism sector because of the high cost of living in the country and the high taxes which are already burdening the tourism sector in this country. Case in point, the last budget, a tax to put $10 a day on the rentals of vehicles in Barbados, an additional $10 a day. Obviously, this makes the Barbados tourism product uncompetitive. And you are seeing that when you hear the exit surveys from the visitors, the Barbados is expensive. So you need to ask the question, how much of the foreign exchange earned in the tourism sector is actually staying in Barbados? Because a lot of it goes in taxes, and then after you pay for your room rate, your accommodation, there's hardly much to spend in product here in Barbados. So we are not seeing a tourism sector where much foreign exchange is being generated. You may see an influx of tourists, we may be getting numbers, but if we were really getting the numbers in terms of the earning potential of foreign exchange, the government would not have to be here today to borrow money to pay back its debt. It would not have to be here to do that. And not only that, but borrow money at a higher interest rate to pay back a debt. You are borrowing money at an interest rate of 8% to pay back debt, which has an interest rate of 6.5%, and in some cases, with regard to the IMF debt, under 4%. I don't know how you can say that this makes good business. It makes good business for the persons who are investing, because every investor would like a strong return on their investment. But it is not good business for the people of Barbados who have to repay these loans. And how are these loans repaid? These loans are repaid through revenue generated through taxes. And we are already crying out for the high cost of living in this country. So if the government is borrowing now a loan at 8% interest rate to repay loans at 6.5% and 4% interest, it means that they obviously have to maintain the high taxation levels, if not increase the taxation levels, in order to earn sufficient revenue to pay off these loans when they are due. And I'm certain that many Barbadians today do not want to hear this, because we would want to hear from this government that we are taking serious measures to reduce the price of oil in this gas in this country, the amount that we pay at the pump. I believe you took 2 cents off one day, and then you put back on the cent 2 days after. That is not helping Barbadians. That is not helping the economy. That is not helping Barbados. It is not helping the economy, because any productive sector needs fuel to operate. It is one of your highest overheads. And if the gas prices in Barbados are too high, it means that our manufacturing sector will have high overheads. Even our agricultural sector will have high overhead. Our distribution sector will have high overheads. Our tourism sector will have high overheads. What is the government doing to make revenue earning other than taxation in this country beneficial to Barbadians and to investors? The government needs to get out of the regime of taxing its way out of this crisis, and a crisis which they are creating. You need to get out of it. Every single aspect of this country is facing high cost of living. High cost of taxes because of this government. Barbadians would love to hear that the VAT will be reduced from 17.5%, that the tax on foreign exchange will be taken off, that some of the taxes which they have implemented in this country will be removed. The sewage tax will be removed, especially for persons who live in areas that don't contribute to the South Coast Sewage Project. That we would want to hear that those things will be removed. It would go a long way in reduce the cost of living. We would want to hear this government being able to come to the people of Barbados and say that they're dealing with the grocery prices in this country in such a way that it will see a reduction, but it will not happen if the government thinks that an 8% loan to repay loans at 6.5% and 4% is a good idea. Yes, it would be oversold because the investors overseas are glad to see a windfall in interest payments. So you would get any and everybody buying into it, but it does not mean it is a good investment and a good opportunity for the people of Barbados. And I come to all of those loans, which we've heard before, was to build resilience. No one is arguing with the clause, the natural disaster and the pandemic clause within the loan agreements, but I hope it is not the intention of the government taking out these loans to hope for a natural disaster. So no one is taken away from this. Yes, this is a good part of the loan agreement, but it's a good portion of the loan agreement. But we have heard several stories, but we have not seen it translated to the people of Barbados, the benefit of all of these loans to give resilience. And you can go through some of these loans, Mr. President. There's a fiscal stability, growth, and social protection policy based loan from the Caribbean Development Bank. There are actually two of those, Mr. President, in the amount of $75 million each. So that's $150 million. So we've heard that story before, Mr. President. And then when you look at the Inter-American Development Bank, there's a digital transformation for inclusive and quality education. There's also the program Strengthening Social Services in Barbados, $100 million. And the Sustainable Development Policy Program, another $100 million from the Inter-American Development Bank. So we heard this story several times, but Barbadians are not really seeing it. Because you have a situation where our health service, the geriatric hospital, there's no supplies there for persons. You have a situation there where the drug service is often out of stock of necessary medication for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. You're not seeing it. Barbadians are complaining about the quality of the service at all of the institutions managed by this government. You have a situation where the schools close nearly every week as a result of different environmental problems, obviously because adequate supplies are not being supplied to the schools to deal with the environmental issues. So, Mr. President, where is the money going? We've heard this story several times before. And also, back to Senator Nichols' point, it might be good time for this government to recognize that a society, it has the people and the economy as well. You pay attention to both parts. Because as we read today, you had the crime situation in this country is worrying most Barbadians, and that impacts on the performance of the economy. It will impact on the tourism sector as well. It would impact on the entertainment sector as well. It would impact on the revenue earning potential of this country as well. So it is high time that this government recognize that you can't just focus on the economy and leave the society to suffer. Because even though they may boast of a 6.3% unemployment rate, when you go into the communities, those numbers don't make sense or make a difference to people. The number of Barbadians who are unemployed or underemployed is a cause for concern for every single household in Barbados. And when you're talking about production as well, when you put workers on a 3-year contract, they can't qualify for a mortgage to build a house, or they can't qualify for a loan to purchase a vehicle. So therefore, what are you doing then to your indigenous productive sectors, because you are reducing the potential for development in this country and reducing the opportunities for Barbadians to to build houses, so it impacts on employment in the construction sector. And it also impacts on the purchase of inputs to furnish those houses and to upkeep those houses as well. All of these are things that this government needs to acknowledge and recognize. So you may come with fancy footwork in terms of boasting the metrics that you want to boast, But the reality is that this country's debt service ratio has increased under this government. So the more money that you have to take out to repay your debt, the less money you have for capital works projects, and the less money you have for developmental and social projects in this country. And right now, this country is needing those developmental and social projects. And this Barbados Labour Party government has failed to improve the revenue earning potential of any of the major sectors in this country. Agriculture is dead or almost dying. Manufacturing, you hardly hear anything. You hardly hear this government speak about what it is earning in foreign exchange through exports. We would love to hear that, and perhaps when the Senator Cummings is wrapping up, she can give some details, but do not let Barbadians lead us in this country into a trap where we must borrow money in order to repay loans. It is not sustainable. We need to get to the stage. Yes, we need to borrow to shore up the foreign reserves, but we also need to earn foreign reserves as well. And you earn the foreign reserves by investing in your productive sectors, and so that a level of outflows from those same foreign reserves, more of it will stay within the country. And this is not what is happening with this government. So this is a bad deal for the people of Barbados. And based on the terms of this loan, it will come to maturity in 2035. We are saddling our young people with loans that they probably will not be able to repay unless we change the trajectory of this country. Because right now, the trajectory of this country, based on the Barbados Labour Party, agriculture is dead, manufacturing is dead, and tourism, we are barely getting by. Barely getting by based on the popularity of this country. But it can be affected if we do not deal with the crime situation in this country, and it will be affected if we do not do significant work to reduce the taxes so that our tourism product will become competitive once again. So an 8% loan to repay loans at 6.5% and under 4% cannot pass. And Mr. President, I cannot support this resolution.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Her Honor, Her Honor, the Most Honorable Senator Thompson.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. This has been a very interesting debate. It's been an interesting debate because of the information and perspectives, the information that has come to the table and the perspectives that have been expressed. I want to respond to some of the issues that have been raised and some of the questions which have been asked, and to also share my perspectives. It is easy to be a member of the opposition. It is easy because it does not require you to find any solutions. It requires only two things: to generate enough fear and discontent that people will not support the government. So often we hear politically that governments are not voted in, governments are voted out. And therefore, if you use rhetoric, if you use emotional drivers, if you nip constantly at the heels of the government, if you say things that you know resonate with people irrespective of whether they're accurate or true, you can create enough of a groundswell of discontent that you dislodge a government. We saw that in 2008, where enough discontent was created that a well-performing government with the country in great shape economically was unseated and an incompetent, unruly group replaced them, which soon had the country in dire straits. The political strategy has not changed. And so today, here, what we have heard from the two opposition senators speaking in tandem for the first time, and I commend in particular Senator Walters, but I understand he is driven by two considerations. One, that it is almost lunch and he hopes to steal chicken off of somebody's plate. And two, with the triumph or the acquittal of a certain colleague, he knows that he is in dire straits in the constituency in which he hopes to run. So he is driven by a level of personal fear. And for him, you see him speaking in a do or die kind of way. Well, the other one, who found it possible to be part of a campaign in which the level of insult thrown at a former colleague in this place, stressing on height and girth. I was a little shocked that he tolerated it, being half the height and twice the girth, if you do the racial studies of the colleague, but it was allowed. And I understand that the erstwhile leader of the Democratic Labour Party has some intention to go to St. John. So, you know, Fluffy may be in a little trouble in terms of choices. So we want to look, therefore, at some of the questions, some of the issues that were raised, and perhaps give some answers. I take the point of the correlation between high crime and economic deterioration. That cannot be gainsaid. It is difficult. It is easy to say, let the government do something. The government has to do something. Hang them, pay the police more. All of these are the mantras that one is hearing, but they're easy. They are easy in the context of a society where government has put multiple measures in place to address crime, from legislation to increasing prosecutions to judges and prosecutors being increased, to courts being increased to deal with criminal matters, to putting more police on the street, to giving them headquarters and stations and equipment and vehicles of which they were deprived when the Democratic Labour Party was in office. We have used social intervention measures, and the problem persists because it is not easily solved. It persists because there is a pandemic of crime sweeping the Caribbean. And I say this, Barbados, despite our challenges, continues to have one of the lowest crime rates in the Caribbean. It is remarkable that we feel a high sense of angst, and with the repetition that crime is bad, something has to be done, and with every publication, true or false, of somebody saying, a man chased me today. The man chasing you because you drop a $20 bill and he's trying to hang it to you, but your mind is so caught up with the fact that crime is high, and if you see a man there, you have to be careful, or this and that. So we hear now how bad crime is constantly, and I'm not suggesting that we do not have a problem, we do. But I want some of the people who are saying the government should do something to make suggestions of things that have not yet been tried. I want some of the people who are saying the government should do something and have the guns hidden under them when the grandmothers who have the guns hidden when the police come to search for them, the aunties who have the guns and the weapons under the wig, and in their wheelchair, they are the ones who have to help do something. Those who know where some of the wrongdoers are have to say something. We have to unite as a society and work with government and the police if we plan to address the crime issue. But where you have a situation where people don't want to work, unemployment is the part of the lowest in history. You have people who tell you openly they don't want any hard work. You have people who tell you they have no skills, but they tell you that the job, a blue-collar job, does not pay them enough and they prefer to stay home. When they stay home, how do you think they're planning to get money? You have every employer complains about productivity and attitudes in the workplace. We really have a problem that is wider. It is manifesting itself partly in the crime situation, but it is much wider than that. And it didn't start in 2018. This is something that has been boiling on a low heat for a long time. When you could hear from a professional that 95% of the people in prison charged with violent crimes read at the level of 3 years old, it means that our school system is not identifying people with problems who really will come out not only with low skills but low self-esteem and be incapable of getting work in the workplace. But yet there are those, even though the common entrance eliminates children, eliminates futures, and eliminates opportunity, there are those like the leader of the opposition who says, keep it. So it doesn't matter how many poor people's children are. Make no mistake. It is the poor people whose children may not be naturally brilliant, because the ones who are bright are going to get through. But the ones who are not naturally brilliant, who are at work and don't go to the PTA meetings, who are on the block and don't talk to the teachers, who don't want to negotiate or converse, and some of whom cannot afford to send children to lessons, the multiple lessons that the middle class people who can read, expose their children to newspapers and to all kinds of things, help them with fractions and algebra and English, and still turn around and send them to multiple lessons. So it is poor people that are being disadvantaged by the common entrance exam. It is the fact that we grew up with praying mothers and were forced to go to Sunday school and church, where were taught certain values, including the value for life. But now we don't do that. We don't send our children to the church or Sunday school. We don't go ourselves. And a lot of young people you hear them say all that, I don't care about nobody. I don't care about this and I don't care about that. And in fact, they also don't care about life. They don't care about the value of anybody's life, and the reality is they don't care about their own, because they don't expect to live long. So they want to live hard and fast. And so let us, when we talk about crime, I saw in a country that I will not name, here in the Caribbean, one weekend, a small shop, a few people gone in to buy a few things, 6 people gunned down in one go, 4 bodies on the ground dead. You know, so we have a pandemic in the Caribbean. We have a problem in the Caribbean. And the answer is not getting up and cursing the government, because as my mother used to say, when you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And when you come to government, and albeit a long time from now, if the pandemic persists, the same population is going to say, let the government do something. And therefore, the nature of the conversation that we have to have is, what are the social structural problems that need to be addressed How do we teach conflict resolution skills? How do we get into the communities and deal with the challenges? How do we stop the boy or girl from picking up the gun in the first place? Because when they have it in hand, you can't save them. So the interventions have to come before. I want to turn then to some of the economic issues or the financial issues which were raised. What is the government doing with the money? The government is doing roads and buying garbage trucks and buses, COVID cushioning. Well, we had to use loans because the Dems left no money. So let's start. That if you wanted to deal with that issue, if you want to deal with the problems in the country, there's a point at which you have to have loans. One, the problem is not the loans, because people borrow and governments borrow. The question is whether or not the economy is growing, and it is. The question is whether or not the debt is unsustainable, and the debt is sustainable. When we came to government, our debt profile was 179% of GDP. It is now 115%. So there are less loans or less loan repayments to being done now than there were before. If you have a loan that are loans that are 179% of your income, and then you reduce it to 115%, it means that you have a lot more money available to you because your financial position, your fiscal position, your economic position is better. We have given civil servants salary increases that they did not have in 10+ years. The whole QEH&E has been revamped and several departments upgraded. The NIS that the Dems did not pay, the VAT returns that people did not get, the monies owed to citizens, ordinary poor people, small business people, not just big business, that people's businesses were on the verge of collapse. Government has repaid and given money back, paid VAT, paid VAT returns. We have stopped printing money, which undermined the economy completely under the Democratic Labour Party. It is a huge fiscal and economic error to print money, decried by serious economists, and it was the principal operating methodology of the Democratic Labour Party. That has been stopped. We dealt with the South Coast sewage project, our sewage system, and improved Bridgetown. There has not been a stink out in town since 2018 when we came to government. Prior to that, you could not drive through town every other week. Town was so full that the people who live around there, all those surrounding communities, Chapman Lane and so on, could not sleep at night. Little children with rhinotracheal and bronchial and related conditions had serious problems. And we saw, people will not forget the photographs of the trees, full trees, growing up in the containers that were supposed, containers is a loose word, the tanks, thank you, that were supposed, and pumpkins. Well, I don't know who ate them, but pumpkins. So that we are in a much better, so when you try to suggest that things are bad, the fact that government is able to do all of these things, service and reduce its debt, shows that the economy really is in good shape. I haven't even got to the fact that we had 20+ downgrades of the economy under the Democratic Labour Party, and right now we have been having upgrade after upgrade after upgrade. And this loan, I don't care how cheap money is. People do not risk their money foolishly. People only risk their money when they expect to get a return. So if the interest is up in the air and people do not feel they are going to get a return on it, they are not going to line up to lend it to you. And this the fact that there were 90 plus international bond investors trying to lend Barbados money speaks to the fact that there has been significant restoration of confidence in the Barbados economy and in the way in which it is being run and managed, including its debt profile. So it is not a fact that things are bad and people coming to borrow money or lend money just because they will get a good return, because people are not going to be reckless with their money. The last government, if they were willing to pay rates as high as the central bank or whatever is the highest building in Barbados, nobody was prepared to lend them money. That is why they looted the NIS. The NIS fund was looted. Honorable Senator Walter speaks about the problems with the NIS. The problems in the NIS originated because the fund was looted by the Democratic Labour Party to the extent that when you needed money from NIS as a Barbadian, you could not get it. You could not get it. But now, people are getting their NIS monies. The age for NIS or for retirement was increased, not because the government owes NIS money, but because the number of people in the workforce are reducing because of changes in population dynamics. People are living much longer with chronic non-communicable diseases, which are a high charge on the fund. And all over the world, NIS funds, or whatever they're called, some don't call them NIS, they may call them their Social Security Fund or National Security Fund and so on. All of them in major developed countries, even with sound economic management, are now encouraging people to work till as much as 70 years old because of a similar challenge. The fact that you have shrinking population size, fewer numbers in the workforce to pay NIS, and high demands because of chronic non-communicable diseases. This loan will eliminate the need to repay principal to the IMF from July 2025 to June 2027. It will reduce the borrowing rate, or the government borrowing, from 505% of the quota to 395%. It therefore gives us room for emergency borrowing. Senator Kevin Boyce asked the question, why now? The answer to the question, why now, has to do with the fact that there are wars and rumors of wars. There is saber rattling and there are bombs dropping. The level of uncertainty in the global economy makes it mandatory for the government to go to the marketplace to secure its fiscal position in the event that there is an international crisis and rates escalate. That's the simple answer. You do not wait until, if the car wobbling, the wheels wobbling, the engine sputtering, and things are going wrong, you do not wait till the car breaks down in the middle of the rain and say, Lord have mercy, I never got an umbrella. You go and you get your loan and put yourself in a position to protect yourself. The government is protecting the country by going to the marketplace, giving itself, and going to the marketplace in a situation where there is improved confidence by investors, where our reputation is improved and we are in a position to borrow, where people have respect for the country, and where the escalation of international crises could so jeopardize your economy or your country that you have to cushion yourself against the economic uncertainty. I cannot answer the legitimate question as to what should be the new standard for your foreign exchange reserves. I'm not an economist. But what I do know as a Bajan, as an observer, as a student of life, of politics, I don't call myself a student of economics, but I watch on from the distance. The global uncertainty in which we live now makes it imperative that you have a larger degree of cushion than would have been required before, because the period of shocks are long and severe. And on top of that, these exogenous economic shocks, whether they are catalyzed by war or by trade wars, we are also compounded with environmental shocks. The fact that we are seeing environmental crises of a very serious sort and extreme weather events of the most severe type with far more frequency than we did before. And that is true throughout the Caribbean. And therefore, if you have your eye on your externalities, irrespective of how rapidly the economy is growing, if you have your eye on the international markets, irrespective of how low your unemployment is, if you have your eye on the circumstances which you do not control, you would put yourself in a position to have additional security in the event that the worst comes to the worst. Trinidadians have a wonderful saying: when your neighbor's house on fire, wet your own. And that is what the government is attempting to do. It is looking at the international circumstances and saying, the economy is doing extremely well, unemployment is very low. We are getting upgrades of our economy. The economy is growing. Yes, food prices are high, but food prices are not high in Barbados alone. A cart of eggs in the United States, where they subsidized farming, was like 40 or 50 US. So food prices are high all over the world, and despite all of the measures that this government has put in place to cushion the public, to keep prices as low as they possibly can by engaging with supermarkets, by dealing with matters of freighting, by reducing taxes and costs that would impact the average person, food prices and the cost of living will remain high. But inflation in Barbados is again among some of the lowest in the Caribbean. So that even though we are facing high prices, the reality is that many of our neighbors are facing higher, and we do not, and they do not have things in place like a minimum wage to protect the poor, as we have twice now intervened in the marketplace. And woe on those employers and their financial advisors who cut people's time, to increase profits for big business people at the expense of the small man and poor man whose situation they parrot and trumpet hypocritically. Woe to financiers, to the financial advisors who do that. I very rarely eat burgers. Mr. President, sir, gas prices, well, I'm not going to touch that because that is my colleague's portfolio and therefore she can better speak to the issue. But again, gas prices in the Caribbean and the Pacific are the highest in the world. I'm going to repeat that. Gas prices in the Caribbean and the Pacific are the highest in the world because we are way outside major centers of production. Our status as small island developing states means that we cannot create economies of scope or scale. The markets are too small to be attractive to suppliers, and then you have to send the product long distances to reach the Pacific Islands and to reach Caribbean Islands. So our gas prices are amongst the highest in the world. I'm sure the minister will speak to the mechanisms that government has put in place to keep gas prices down. And I'm saying this, were it not, and I hope that we are going to have a debate which will allow us to explore these things in detail, were it not for the interventions of this administration in the marketplace, things would be a lot worse. And given our experience with the Democratic Labour Party, were there in government, we would be on the verge of collapse. And the dollar which they had threatened to devalue, which is again very strong, would have gone through the editors, sir. It would have get liquor. It won't have no value, sir. So it is all right for the opposition with ease, with ambition beyond ability, to get up and say, the government must do something. Where's the money going? This is too high and that is too high. Why don't you deal with it? It is easy. But let us now separate rhetoric from reality. Let us now come to the fact where we look at the measures which are being used to manage the country and to manage the economy that are being applauded internationally and by people who are reasonable and not rash, who understand the dynamics that are driving an economy and the externalities that, try as you might, you have no, over which you really have no control. The point is, what do you control and that you can address? And the government has been doing its utmost, not just to invest heavily in tourism, but to diversify the economy, even to the extent now, sir, of promising to go into pharmaceutical production, which we anticipate will make significant difference to our foreign exchange earnings. Mr. President, I know that my time has expired and I therefore want to express gratitude and end by saying, sir, that when you look at the loan, and market conditions have changed, and that is why the interest rate is higher. But when you do the cost-benefit analysis, and you look ahead at what is on the horizon, the serious social and economic rain clouds which have already started the deluge, the government has taken steps to ensure that we have an economic umbrella which protects our society, sir. And I therefore am happy to give my support to the measure before the chamber. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Most Honorable Senator Thompson. Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to thank all of the colleagues who have spoken, and I want to, as is my custom, go through the responses as I am able to give them. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge the presence here in the chamber with us for the benefit of those in particular who are like, as another colleague once said in another place, Lilliputians waiting in tall grass. We have here among us today the chief debt strategy analyst from the Ministry of Finance, who has been here with us and providing guidance on this debate. So I want to get into the substance of my responses at this time, Mr. President. No, Mr. President, I believe that my colleague, Senator Nichols, has aptly dispensed both after the fact and in advance of the submissions from the Democratic Labour Party representatives in this honorable chamber. Senator Walters, who continues, as I believe Senator Thompson said, to have ambitions that exceed his ability, has attempted to mislead this chamber and the public of Barbados. And I believe that the tax rebate may be in the mail for Senator Worrell, based on his contribution. So, Mr. President, let me get into the meat of the matter, because the big book, as was referred to by the leader of the opposition in the other place, is an interesting thing. And it is important that we must learn how to read the big book, and we must know what is in it. Now, Table 8 of the big book shows the balance between domestic and foreign financing. Now, I was happy, on one hand, to hear Senator Worrell make reference to the external financing sources in Table 8. But what troubled me was that he mentioned the Caribbean Development Bank, which is not mentioned in Table 8, but in fact the Caribbean Development Fund. And in this honorable chamber, the Caribbean Development Fund, as opposed to the Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean Development Fund in Table 8, at the beginning of, which is where the financing, sources of financing is captured, we came to this honorable chamber, I believe last year or maybe earlier this year, and we passed a resolution. And we passed a resolution for the financing from the Caribbean Development Fund to take very specific actions, Mr. President. What were those actions? And I believe Senator Thompson spoke about them without making reference to the actual source of financing. The source of financing to deal with the Bridgetown Sewage Treatment Plant is captured in Table 8 under the Caribbean Development Fund. We passed a resolution in this chamber to support that source of financing, Mr. President, to take the sewage off the streets in Table 8. Table 8 on the page, I think it's page 8.
On a point of order, Mr. President, I will, here to stop Senator Cummins, but I never referred to Table 8, and I did refer to the Caribbean Development Bank. It had nothing to do with the Caribbean Development Fund.
Please continue, Senator Cummins.
I assure you that those on this side know the difference between the two. What is captured in Table 8 is, in fact, the Caribbean Development Fund, indeed. And so I'm referring to Caribbean Development Fund on Table 8. The loan that was passed in this honorable chamber, captured in Table 8 under the Caribbean Development Fund, is for the purpose of treating to the Bridgetown Sewage Plant. And I want to specifically outline what that is. Component 1 involves installing centralized Bridgetown sewage treatment.
Again, on a point of order.
Yeah, what's the point of order?
I referred to the Caribbean Development Bank Fund, Barbados First Programmatic Fiscal Stability, Growth and Social Protection Policy-Based Loan, Mr. President. There's a front and a back part to the book.
And what page or table was that, Senator Worrell?
Mr. President, is Appendix C. Okay. Right, the statement of public debt as of the 31st of December 2024.
Thank you very much. Please press on, Senator Cummings.
The honorable senator is too eager because I'm coming to the Caribbean Development Bank in a minute, but I'm speaking first and foremost for the Caribbean Development Fund. It is the source of financing to address the sewage that the Democratic Labour Party left on the streets of this country and the stench to which Senator Thompson just referred. Now, the CAF financing, which was mentioned as well, that financing, where is the money going, Mr. President? To build the roads, all of the roads that Barbadians can see with their own two eyes. That is the source of financing from CAF. Now, Mr. President, under the Inter-American Development Bank, now I want to spend 2 minutes on the Inter-American Development Bank because the majority of the financing under the IDB, those were inherited loans that came from the Democratic Labour Party, the tourism plan, the tourism project, the Mains Replacement Project, all of those projects, some of them 8+ years overdue and unimplemented. The Competitiveness Project, all of those projects unimplemented for the most part and had to be extended. They remained on our books, Mr. President. Those are among the loans that are now consolidated within the references that were made to the Inter-American Development Bank. Equally so, Mr. President, the Bank of China, Exim Bank of China, we also know that there were roads under the Complant facility to do what? Two things. One, to construct the Wyndham Hotel, then known as Sam Norris Castle, started by who? The Democratic Labour Party, finished by us, Mr. President. That includes the financing. So I was happy for the honourable member to begin the process of listing the sources of external financing because the bulk of it is external, it's inherited debt. The Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. President, the Caribbean Development Bank, we also had financing under the CDB, and I want to get into the specifics of the CDB financing. The CDB financing as well, Mr. President, we had several facilities under the CDB, and a significant number of those were also inherited. And as a matter of fact, in 2018, when we went through the debt restructuring, under the debt restructuring, the CDB was perhaps the only institution that had provisions within its loan facility that obstructed the government from undertaking a restructuring exercise in the same way. And so the Adams International Airport runway rehabilitation project, that was financed under the Caribbean Development Bank. Harson's Cave at that point also came under the Caribbean Development Fund and a range of additional things. So there were several facilities captured and were restructured. So when you see them amalgamated and listed, there are multiple facilities, some new, some old, all having to be repaid. But I want to then get into some specifics now, Mr. President, on the actual repayment of the debt, because if the argument is being made that we are not repaying our debt, Mr. President, I want to start with one, a debt restructuring as at 2018, and then I want to go into what happened post-2019 and what the government expenditure on. $10 million to the Welfare Department to meet the additional cost of grants to individuals. $10 million additional to the Welfare Department. $10 million on top of that to the Household Survival Program and $10 million to the Adopt a Family Program to provide cash transfers to support vulnerable families as a result of the economic fallout of the pandemic. There was $3.5 million provided to the National Assistance Board to establish community elderly care facilities. $48.8 million for the management of COVID to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. $10.7 million to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital as well to support current operations. To the Transport Board, because you can see the buses. So when we're talking about expenditure, where the government is spending the money, $23.8 million to the Transport Board. And we have seen buses year on year on year roll out in the country. This country does not need the Democratic Labour Party to look and play Houdini with what we have spent money on. You could see it with your own two eyes, Mr. President. $10.0 million during COVID, to provide laptops and tablets to persons who could not afford it to assist with online classes. Now, this was in the fiscal framework, Mr. President, of, let me make sure I get the year right. This is 23, 24, going backwards. So I want to come forward to the 25-26 framework. The 25-26 framework we talk about what's happening at a sectoral level, whether there's growth or not. Mr. President, long-stay tourist arrivals increased by 17.9% in 2024. This was fueled by a couple of things, including the investment in ICC Men's Cricket World Cup. Key markets, we saw significant growth, including hotel rates increasing with occupancy levels. The construction sector grew by 7.1% in that same year, and there were a number of ongoing public infrastructure projects. Agriculture, despite the pronouncements of two members of this opposition side, experienced growth by 5.4% in 2024, despite some declines in some food crops as a result of weather challenges.
Senator Cummings is misleading the chamber by stating the increase in visitor arrivals for 2024, you have to compare it to the decline that you had over the COVID period. Tourism arrivals in this country only reached the pre-COVID level last year. So that cannot count.
Mr. President, I'm not going to yield to any future interruptions at this point, because the honourable member had his time and he did not add any value then, and he's not adding any value now, Mr. President. So I don't need the honourable member to tell me what happened during COVID. I was the Minister of Tourism during COVID, though. I know what happened, and there was a 73% decline, but I also know, Mr. President, that we have recovered to 2019 levels already, Mr. President, and that we are seeing a further growth. Mr. President, we are managing bread shops in here. There's a whole sector, Mr. President.
Mr. President, on a point of order, I would hate to interrupt the speaker again, but yes, she was the Minister of Tourism, and we only returned to pre-COVID levels last year, lagging behind the rest of the Caribbean, who had returned more than a year or two in advance.
Mr. President, that is not a point of order. If the honourable member wants to speak,
Mr. President.
The World has the floor, please.
I don't use.
It shows, Mr. President, that our tourism sector is underperforming and is less competitive than our neighbors. That is the issue.
Thank you for your speech. It's not a point of order. Senator Cummings, please continue.
Mr. President, I believe that, just to be clear, the honourable member, when he interrupted me for the umpteenth time again, to yet grandstand again, that he said that last year, 2024, we did not recover in tourism until last year. I am certain that I am referring to 2024 numbers. So maybe there's a disparity in the honourable member's understanding of what last year refers to. Last year's 2024? No, Mr. President, let's move on. Labour market conditions also improved with the unemployment rate, Mr. President, in 2024, last year, decreasing to 6.9%. In this year, Mr. President, you have heard in the central bank figures that it has further declined, and it is at 6.2%. The Deputy Speaker spoke earlier, Mr. President, and she spoke about the debt to GDP ratio. We had the debt to GDP ratio last year fell to 104% of GDP, and I believe we also heard from the Honourable Prime Minister in the other place that this financial year, this year, 2025, it is expected to decline to double digits, down from 104%, Mr. President. We were the third high, and the Honourable Deputy President is correct. She is reminding me that we were the third highest indebted country in the world, in the weeds with people like Greece and so on that had Europeans to buy them out. And we have now come to 104% of GDP in 2024 with an expected decline in 2025 to dip to double-digit levels. That is economic management, and you can see what this government is doing, Mr. President. And now, I want to come back to some of the additional questions that were raised, and I understand the questions that were raised by Senator Boyce, and I want to respond to them. Now, Mr. President, the There were two numbers that were given, one by Senator Walters and one by Senator Boyce. Senator Boyce projected what he expected it to be, and we have seen from the fiscal management team that this operation is meant to reduce the government of Barbados's total debt service by approximately 16%, 16%. For the remainder of 2025 and from 2026, and then from 2027 through the end of 2029, it is expected to reduce it by 7% on top of what we have just described. This is what has come in from the analysts and the experts who have projected what Barbados's debt service is going to be. But I want to just close on the last 2 points, Mr. President. When we talk about taxing ourselves out of debt, this government has brought successive budgets, much to the annoyance of the opposition, even when their previous president, before he was ousted, and then the current president, since he has submerged to the top, they always, at all instances, projected as we approach budget periods that there was going to be an increase in taxation. It has not yet happened. It has not yet been realized. There has not yet been an increase in taxation, and yet they persist, Mr. President, in making these projections as to what they expect to happen, and they have not yet been right. So this government has brought a non-tax increased budget for multiple years now in succession. We have not attempted to tax our way out of debt. We have continuously been paying our debt. I do not need to go over what Senator Nichols has said, which is absolutely the fact. We did not print money. We are not engaging in quantitative easing, as the economists would call it. We are not engaging in raping and pillaging the National Insurance Fund, as was done by others. We're not doing any of that. We are engaging in sound and well-established practices of economic and fiscal management of this country's affairs. The final thing that I want to say is to collide for just a few moments on the important issues of social. I don't think that any government or any representative of any government would stand in this place on any side, independent side, government side, they may do so on the opposition side, and attempt to make light and politicize issues relating to the relationship between crime and social and society and economic management. Mr. President, I must tell you that yesterday morning, when I was reading the newspaper, I don't usually read in great detail the crime, the court pages, but this particular story caught my attention. And it resonated with me, and so when Senator Thompson spoke, it reminded me of it. There was a young man, he was 18 years old, Mr. President, and he, along with a much older man, had gone off on a jaunt. This older person had picked him up this morning from wherever he lived and took him supposedly to go and pick fruit, to work, to have employment, to earn by legitimate means. He decided, and it is reported in the newspaper, and I hope it is correct, he decided that he didn't feel like picking fruit that day, and he decided that he was just going to rob the first person he saw. And he finished the statement by saying, "I is a different breed." That stayed with me, Mr. President, because there is a cadre of person who, as much as you would want to make sure that there are employment opportunities for everybody, they will tell you, like that young man, they are a different breed. They are not looking for employment. There is a cadre of person, and I hope to God that they are in the minority, that it does not matter how many construction gateway projects the government runs. It does not matter how many Barbados Vocational Training Board programs a government runs. It does not matter how many programs the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute runs. It does not matter how much the government expands the Barbados Community College and puts more programs there. It does not matter how the government reinstates university access for all to have the ability to go to university. It does not matter how many free courses the National Transformation Initiative has. There are some in our society who will stand like this young man and say, "I don't feel like going and engaging in legitimate revenue earning, income earning activity, I can just rob the first body I see because I is a different breed. That is a reality that this country has to confront. When we are at a stage now where we are dealing with a cadre of persons who do not want to work, but are looking to take from those who are sacrificing, getting up when the days come, going to school, doing training, doing courses, learning a skill, learning a trade, running a small business, running a shop, going to university, earning, and then they want to take from them because them don't feel like picking fruit. That's a serious indictment, Mr. President, and this is why the government and all right-thinking Barbadians have been calling on Barbados to take an all-of-society approach, an all-of-Barbados, all-of-country approach. The economy is one thing. Liability fiscal management is one thing. There's highbrow conversations that we can have in here, and people can get up and they can grandstand, and they can try to score political points, and they can misread documents and misrepresent information. But at the end of the day, we still have to deal with that underbelly in this country that doesn't care about any of this stuff, because you know what the facts are, Mr. President? There are many people who will never see this debate in here today. There are many people who will never read a newspaper in which all of these things are being carried. There are many people who will never watch CBC News to see it carried on the news, who will not collide at any point in time with any official or authentic source of information. They will live in the shadows of the society, grasping information from people who know marginally less than they do, and from viral voice notes, Mr. President, which capture fractions of the truth and put it with a healthy dose of indignation and self-righteousness and create angst and more anger and everybody vexed and up in arms, but they're only fractions of facts. And I'm calling on the political parties that want to represent the people of this country to demonstrate a greater level of responsibility than we are seeing now in this country. This is an all-of-government approach. This is an all-of-country approach, and it is not a moment for us to camp out on either side of economy versus society, government versus private, home versus school, community versus household. This is an all-of-country approach, and I'm calling on all right-thinking Barbadians to realize that this has to take all of us putting our hands to the plow and making a commitment to make Barbados better. The government is committed, this government is committed, this Barbados Labour Party government is committed to focusing on ensuring that we have a macro environment that works for all. It works for the economy, it works for the society, it works for social, it works for health, it works for community, it works for everything. But we need people who sit wherever they sit in their respective spheres of influence to come together with a common goal of ensuring that these things trickle down to the lowest common denominator and that Barbados benefits and thrives from all of these interventions that we're making to ensure that Barbados has a fiscal space to spend on social infrastructure, our capital works programs, but also our people. And these are the submissions that I want to make today, Mr. President, and thank all of the colleagues for their submissions, and I beg to move that this resolution now do pass.
The question is that this resolution be now agreed to. Will those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. No. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore now passed.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the sitting of the Senate is now suspended until 3:45 this afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3:45 p.m. today. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting is therefore adjourned until 3:45 p.m. today.